A very important concept to understand is the concept of cheap and easy versus priceless, right? Cheap and easy versus priceless. And I think this is very important for men to understand. Very important for everyone to understand, right? What it means to be cheap or easy versus what it means to be priceless. So first off, we need to understand what the dominant ego is and what the submissive ego are, right? The dominant ego is what, in receiving whatever this is, strokes your ego or is a sign that you are valued by the opposite sex, right? And what the submissive ego is how you value another individual, right? Now follow me. Now, while the sexual polarity quadrant is not gendered, the dominant versus the submissive ego are, because the dominant versus the submissive ego for men versus women are reversed. Very important concept to understand. So when I say the dominant ego and the submissive ego for men and women are reversed, what do I mean? What do I mean? Well, the submissive ego is typically what's going to be more connected to the emotions because it's what you feel like you're giving of yourself. This is why we have the concept of a woman who's just the perpetual side chick or the fuck buddy. And we have the concept of the guy who's in the friend zone. Now, there can also be women who are in the friend zone, and there are also men who are in the fuck zone. So I'm not saying that this is something that is completely true across the board, because there are people who play that role, who play that position either way. But what I'm saying is this: typically, most men's egos are going to be more stroked by having sexual access to a woman, while most women's egos are going to be stroked. And I'll say for men, it's sexual access and cooperation. Now, if you're a masculine dominant, you go more so for submission. So you like genuine sexual desire, and you like genuine respect and natural submissiveness. If you're a masculine submissive man, then what you're trading in exchange for cooperation is you're buying cooperation. So you're going to make an investment of emotional validation, social validation, and financial investment in exchange for access to a woman sexually and for cooperation with what it is that you would like to do. That's what the masculine submissive man does. This is why I don't get too heavy into that quote unquote high value man shit, because a lot of times what it is, it's a high value trick. You have more resources that you try to leverage to gain what you want from a woman, right? Understand that. So a masculine dominant man is going to operate differently than a masculine submissive man. But they both can look very masculine. It's not even really a matter of how you look. It's really about your mentality and your capacity. When you develop dominant empathy, right, which is you have the capacity to recognize how pain or stretching can intensify pleasure, and you know when to apply it, and you can identify when an individual is receptive to it. When you can identify genuine sexual desire in a woman, and then you know what to do with it, you are developing dominant empathy. When all you're focused on is gaining access, then you don't really focus on dominant empathy. And this is where different levels of sexual attraction get into this conversation, right? So understand this when I'm talking about cheap and easy versus priceless and what it means. Now, you can be a man, right, who is masculine submissive. Something to understand about masculine submissiveness is that a submissive individual is going to place more value on something they had to put in more work to get. Most men are masculine submissive. Most women are masculine submissive. Right? Very important to understand. And also understand that gender roles or how you look doesn't play a role in what you are within the sexual polarity quadrant. So a woman can be masculine submissive, and by every metric of what people consider to be looking feminine, she can look feminine. But it's about submitting yourself to either a transaction or to social programming, which includes social contracts and covert contracts about what it means for your need for dominant ego validation to be met. And this is where the sexual polarity quadrant, when it comes to masculine dominant and feminine submissive is different, right? It's different. Because for a woman's dominant ego, what she desires is to receive emotional validation, social validation, and financial investment. That's what constitutes a woman's dominant ego. Now, for woman's masculine submissive, she may not be worried so much about the quality of that validation being something that's intrinsic, because she hasn't developed enough dominant empathy, right, to understand what it means to truly stimulate a man mentally, or to create a safe space for a man to be emotionally vulnerable with her. So she just needs that feeling of gaining attention to reaffirm her value to herself, but it never truly works to affirm her value to herself. It's just people pleasing. It doesn't work to affirm her value to herself because it's transactional, right? Now understand this. Masculine energy stifles submissiveness, right? And what it means when I say that masculine energy stifles submissiveness is that feminine energy lubricates submissiveness to crave and experience dominance. Now, men and women have a flipped dominant and submissive ego. So when somebody's cheap, when a man is cheap, that means that he views sex and cooperation in a transactional model. And in order to affirm his value to himself, he wants to give a lower return on investment in order to be in a position. He wants to improve his return on investment. So that means that, okay, cool, it's a 3-date rule, it's a 2-date rule, right? That's what a masculine submissive man may do. He said, this is how much emotional validation, compliments, social validations, taking her out, showing her off, and financial investment, how much you're spending on a date, that you're going to invest in this woman in order to be, and how much you need to receive back in return sexually to feel as if this relationship dynamic or this dynamic of whatever sort is moving in a proper trajectory. Now, what's the issue with this? If this man has a Madonna whore complex, then he views the woman who makes him work and makes him wait and places a premium on their non-sexual connection as the woman who truly resonates with his submissive ego. And it may be off of attractiveness, right? So a man who's masculine submissive may say, well, there's a woman who I would take to McDonald's or Wendy's for a 4-for-4, you know, but there's another woman who I'd be willing to take to Ruth Chris because of how attractive she is. That's a masculine submissive mentality. You're not basing things off of them actually being receptive to your dominance and getting on your program. You're being transactional about what it is you're willing to offer. So understand this, for a woman who is also thinking about her dominant ego validation, right? Her dominant ego, she's going to view a man who's trying to do the bare minimum or trying to do less than the bare minimum as a man who does not value her, right? Very important to understand. That's how she's going to view it. And when we're looking at the concept and the ideology surrounding what it means to be feminine submissive, this is priceless, right? So a man who's cheap may see a woman as easy for having sex with him after going to Wendy's, because these are dates, these are things that he's doing that's preceding the sexual engagement. But if a man were to be masculine dominant, if he wants to go out, it's because he wants to go out, either to vet the woman, or maybe he's doing a masculine dominant exercise in self-control where he wants to make the woman wait and make the woman work for the opportunity to sleep with him. So she might pay for the date, he might pay for the date, it doesn't really matter, but he wants to see how receptive she is to his energy. And if she isn't receptive enough, now he no longer wants to engage with her sexually, or he needs to make his mind first through interacting with her about if this is a woman who's worthy of dick, right? That's a masculine dominant exercise in self-control, right? And a woman can do a masculine dominant exercise in self-control as well. Like a woman can be a woman who has a program, or she has the way she wants to engage in order for a relationship to take place and to transpire. She knows how to be non-sexually appealing. She knows how to stimulate a man's mind. She knows how to be in a position where a man wants to date her and wants to be with her. But because she knows that she has sexual needs, and she knows that based off of her previous experiences, that she's too overstimulated to be in a position with a man in a long-term relationship who doesn't sexually gratify her, and to stick to her standards, her principles of being sexually faithful, or of wanting to be with that man in an integrated relationship. So a woman may do a masculine dominant exercise in self-control and be in a sexual relationship with a man before a date is even taking place, before a relationship is even on the table, to see if there's a capacity for sexual compatibility before she's even thinking about being in a relationship with him. Right? And I haven't talked too much about the masculine dominant exercise and self-control, but that is one aspect of it. I've talked about the masculine submissive exercise and self-control. Check out my video on that concept. The masculine submissive exercise and self-control is in between the low cup space and the high cup space. So it's not a high cup space like masculine dominant or feminine submissive, but it's not a low cup space like masculine submissive or feminine dominant, right? It's in between the two. It's smack dab in between. So it's like a medium cup space, right? So a woman who's easy is really a woman who has a low value that she places on herself about how much validation, emotional, social, or financial, she needs in order to be sexually available to a man. It's a low price, it's a low cost on what she puts on herself sexually. Due to people pleasing, due to insecurities, due to codependency, she has a low value on her sexuality. Now, a priceless woman is a woman who is intrinsically sexually attracted to you, right? She experiences intrinsic sexual desire through interacting with you, and this isn't something that determines whether or not she has the capability of being a long-term partner for you. But if you're a masculine submissive man and you come across a feminine submissive woman, you might assume that this woman is promiscuous. She may be, she may not be, but just because she's not sleeping with you doesn't mean that she isn't. Just because a woman makes you wait and work for it doesn't mean that she isn't. And this is where the sexual polarity quadrant comes in, where I talk about integrating from polarity versus being prematurely integrated, right? This is where it comes in at. Because if you are the type of man who's a masculine dominant man, then you understand that the woman who is sexually attracted to you and who's fucking with you, who's feeling you, is the woman who you need to ascertain if she has the qualities of being relationship or wife material through how she makes it through your program. So with that type of scenario, you may start off as a hookup and then work your way to fuck buddies and work your way to friends with benefits, and then to work your way into a position where if you desire monogamy, you may go through a trial period of monogamy after you've established that you're sexually compatible and this woman adds value outside of sex, and then you may end up in a monogamous relationship. And if you're a man who wants a non-monogamous relationship, then during that time of going from hookup to fuck buddy to friends with benefits to dating, you're letting this woman know and you're showing through your actions and behaviors that you reward good behavior, and that you're not overly caught up and overly excited about sex with some brand new woman, or you don't place too much value on a woman's beauty to where you view that as the premium. See, that's the difference, right? When we're talking about the concept of the bare minimum, right? Right? If you're offering dick, right? Not asking for pussy, but if you're offering dick in a direct manner, then you're not lowballing the woman on her value. You're saying, I'm offering you this opportunity to experience me from the platform of your submissive ego in a way to where you're going to receive pleasure from interacting with me through your submissive ego. That's going to overshadow your desire for dominant ego validation. And it's going to overshadow it to the point where you're willing to be submissive with me in the area of your dominant ego as well, so that you can qualify for the dominant ego validation that you desire. Right? And that's where the feminine submissive with the masculine dominant comes in at. But in order to operate out of this, you have to be self-aware. Self-aware, situationally aware. You have to have the capacity to be integrated within your shadow. And what I mean by being integrated with your shadow and with your anima or your animus is that you have to be self-aware enough to know what you're genuinely attracted to. And you have to deal with an individual who hits your baseline. See, true self-discipline and discipline and emotional discipline that comes with the game comes from being able to display this self-control and this discipline with an individual who actually meets your standards. Right? Because it's really easy to be masculine dominant with someone who doesn't meet your standards. It's really easy to say, all I want is to fuck, when a woman is either not that physically appealing to you, or you already assume that she's not non-sexually attractive to you. And the thing about being a masculine dominant man is that you don't place too much value on what a woman knows before she meets you. You place a value and a premium on her ability to be teachable and her ability to acclimate herself to your program. That's what you place the value on when you're a masculine dominant man. And you also avoid being in a situation where you are overstimulated, right? Because whatever resonates with your submissive ego is going to be what your attention and your desire is truly drawn towards, right? So that means that, let's say you're a man who is a masculine dominant man, cool. But let's say you encounter a woman who has the capacity sexually to, let me throw something random out there, deep throat. If you don't know how to throat train a woman, and the peak of your submissive ego has been stimulated by a woman who had the capacity to put your entire dick in her throat cavity, then that's going to be what you're sexually fixated on. And if you don't know how to teach that to a woman who experiences intrinsic sexual desire and reward, who also is willing to acclimate herself to your program, then a woman may put in all this work to acclimate herself to your program just for you to give more time and attention and energy towards a woman who does. Or let's say you will give more time and attention and energy to a woman who's more attractive, where you bypass the typical standards and boundaries that you have within your program just because of how attracted you are, because your program wasn't based around your principles. It was based around how attracted you are to that individual. And that's something that puts you into a position that corrupts your dominance. It creates feminine dominance. That's not a good thing. You need to be on point. See, that's cheap, right? Cheap is when you value somebody on a low level and you're willing to go below your standards. And because you're willing to go below your standards, you give less than the bare minimum in order to see if that's enough to maintain this person's attention. And if it is, then it is. Like, I'm going to keep it a buck with you. Listen, I've never in my life taken a woman out on a date because I wanted to have casual sex with her. That's real shit. Right? When you're a sexually dominant man, and it doesn't mean you're going to attract every single woman. No man attracts every single woman. But when you're a dominant man, you are accustomed to what it feels like for women to experience intrinsic sexual desire and intrinsic sexual reward. And by experiencing that, it puts you into a position, it puts you into a stance where you do not see the necessity of investing in a woman for sex, right? Now, you may invest in a woman who shows you that she's receptive to you non-sexually, who's willing to add value to your life non-sexually, who will take what it is that you give her and make it something better, right? That's where you invest. See, when you're masculine dominant, what you really are rewarding is not just the sexual behavior. You're rewarding, like when you're a masculine dominant man, the dick is the reward for her being sexually submissive. You give her more pleasure for how sexually submissive she is, right? you take that feminine energy that lubricates her submissiveness and you use your dominance to stretch that to give her an experience that transcends what she's typically accustomed to, right? So, when she's in the feminine submissive, she's typically going to be very vulnerable. She's going to express different things to you. When a woman resonates with you on a sexual level to where she sees you as that guy, or she views you as a sexually non-judgmental guy, a guy who's coming off the scene, being direct about your sexual intentions, oftentimes women will just start spilling the beans about what they've done without even ever really being in a position where they feel like, oh man, I don't want him to see me a certain way. No, if a woman sees you as the type of guy who's accustomed to having those types of experiences, because your competency is just on such a level to where you are the guy that women have those experiences that they typically want to hide from men, then typically she's just going to share and divulge that information to you, sometimes without you even ever having to ask, right? You just have conversations about your experiences and she'll just spill all the beans and tell you all the shit that she's done and what she's into. These are the real things that occur when you're a dominant man. So a woman doesn't try to leverage access to herself sexually in order to gain access to you non-sexually, because she desires access to you sexually just as much, if not more, than you desire access to her sexually. And because of this, she wants to go above and beyond on a sexual level, not only to get the pleasure herself, but also to maintain access to you sexually, because she knows you're accustomed to knowing what it's like to deal with women who are genuinely sexually attracted to you. Now, let me flip this when it comes to cheap and easy versus priceless, right? Let me flip it. Now, a woman's dominant ego desires male vulnerability. It desires to see the emotions of a man. It desires to see a man in a position where he's expressing his vulnerability, right? Right? And when you understand this, we have to come into the concept of the Delilah syndrome. Now, what is the Delilah syndrome? Delilah syndrome is emotional coercion, right? It's where a woman will attempt to manipulate a man into being emotionally vulnerable with her, not for the sake of knowing what to do with it from a masculine dominant position, but for the sake of feeling as if she's gotten the validation she wants, so it's easier to walk away. Now, a masculine dominant, she wants to see the man in a weak position so she can lose respect and lose attraction so she can walk away. Now, a woman who is masculine dominant truly is a woman who is accustomed to men who feel vulnerable with her, and she respects the nature of femininity within a feminine submissive man. And this is something that she desires to experience and craves to experience, but within it, she knows what to do with it. She knows how to build a man up through his vulnerability. Most women are not masculine dominant women. Now, many women want to express themselves as masculine dominant women, but that's not the case. There's a difference between there's a difference between being prematurely integrated and being integrated, right? Like, an integrated woman is a woman who feels a positive correlation between how emotionally vulnerable a man is with her and her genuine sexual attraction towards him, right? So a masculine submissive woman may give up some pussy as a reward for it, but that's coming from a masculine logical place of just wanting to, give him some Scooby snack pussy because she liked what he did because it validated her, right? The masculine dominant woman is a woman who non-sexually, a man, she likes to stretch a man, right? Stretch his mental capacity, stretch his emotional capacity. And through that, if he's receptive to her program, then she'll be in a position to reward good behavior, right? See, the sexual polarity quadrant is not gendered. The dominant and the submissive ego are gendered, right? You have to understand that an individual experiences the highest levels of pleasure through the submissive ego and through feminine energy. Everybody has masculine, feminine, dominant, and submissive within them. Most people want most of the same things out of a long-term relationship, but want them in different orders. Not everybody you meet is, will, or can be the full package for you, and you're not the full package for everyone. So, something to understand is that if you are operating primarily out of masculine dominant, right? Then if you are easy, right? I gotta express it for you. If you are easy emotionally to be vulnerable as a man, you're very vulnerable with women, right? And your emotional reactions, they come so easy. A woman doesn't even have to be that invested in you for you to give her an emotional reaction, for you to be emotionally vulnerable with her. Then it loses its luster if that woman is truly a submissive woman. Because the work she had to do, what she had to invest in order to have access to your emotions and to your mind is so little that by proxy, that means that you don't value yourself as much as you said. Now, that's why feminine submissive is a high cup space. Because sometimes as a feminine submissive, you're going to be operating from intrinsic desire and intrinsic reward in the area of your submissive ego. So sometimes you may take the risk of interacting with an individual who is going to view you as easy when you're really just priceless. Very important to understand. And this is why there is a wisdom, right? There is something natural. There's nature behind feminine energy. There's nature behind feminine energy. And there's something powerful behind it because there's a wisdom behind it. A feminine submissive woman is not going to sustain attraction to a feminine dominant man because the feminine on feminine is going to make it feel like it's going nowhere. There is an actual growth that's being developed through that program. So because there is an actual growth that's being developed and encouraged through that program, the feminine submissive woman is either going to get to a low cup space or not be attracted to the feminine dominant because the cycle of energy is going to be so off. Same thing for a feminine submissive man with the feminine dominant woman. If that cycle of energy off, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. It's not. So when I say cheap and easy versus priceless, what does that mean, right? Like intrinsic desire and intrinsic reward is priceless. Now, it's also going to depend on if that individual hits the baseline of how attracted you need to be to them within your submissive ego to be willing to integrate and to reciprocate, right? But at the same time, it's still priceless. If you give the bare minimum rather than being direct about the dominant ego validation that you desire as a masculine dominant, then oftentimes what's going to happen is if you're really a masculine submissive on the low, then you may conflate. You may not know the difference between if this individual is doing the things that stroke your dominant ego from a stance of intrinsic desire or from a stance of having a low value for themselves. Very important to understand. Because a man can be a people pleaser, right? And be very easy emotionally. He can have a lot of codependency issues and be very emotionally vulnerable and expressive with any woman he comes across and display a lot of weakness. Now, for the right woman, this isn't an issue, but she knows she has to protect this man. And this is why we have to understand that most women are not masculine dominants. And most women who portray themselves as masculine dominant are too overstimulated to be masculine dominant. Because most women are going to have sex through their vaginas. Something to understand is this right here, right? The masculine, like the peak of feminine submissive is typically going to experience a couple of different things. One, orgasms through penetration. Right? See, understand that a woman has a higher capacity for submissiveness. And you might say, why would I say that? Well, I'm going to speak directly about sexual submissiveness, right? Because of the amount of erogenous zones within the vagina that can create orgasm. You got the G spot, you got the A spot, you got the cervix, you got the O spot. That's at least 4 zones that are exclusive to a woman that can create orgasm, which means that when the feminine energy lubricates her submissiveness to crave and experience dominance, there's a higher capacity. Also, women are less likely to experience, like, understand this, right? Women have multiple orgasms, right? Not every woman does with every single man. Definitely not with every single man, because some women are still struggling on having one orgasm with a man. But once a woman really taps into the feminine submissive, she tends to have multiple orgasms from penetration, right? It's just something that typically goes along with it, as long as the man is competent on some level, and sometimes he doesn't even have to be that competent. But guess what? Remember when I said G-spot, which is the Grafenberg spot, which is also the Skene's gland, which connects to the Skene's ducts? You know, shout out to them people. Like, a lot of times women don't understand their sexuality either, because they be online arguing about squirters versus creamers, as if, you know, the women who claim that they're quote unquote creamers are women who maybe don't understand ovulation and how that thickens the mucus of the vaginal secretions, right? Because, you know, it makes it easier to get pregnant. That's what happens when a woman's ovulating. She get real creamy. Yes, some women may be naturally a little bit more creamy, but sometimes it's just ovulation cream. But then you also have squirt, right? And the women who claim to be quote unquote creamers typically talk shit about women who squirt, saying it's pee. Yes, this is scientifically proven. There may be some diluted urine within squirt, but it is not inherently pee, because it's diluted urine mixed with vaginal secretions or vaginal fluids, female ejaculatory fluid from the Skene's gland that comes out through completely different holes, which are the Skene's ducts. It's 2 small holes that are right below the urethra of a woman. Now understand this, right? That Grafenberg spot, that Skene's gland, is homologous to the prostate. So in the same way that there is female ejaculatory fluid that comes from the Skene's ducts, there's also seminal fluid that comes from the prostate, which is where semen comes from. Not sperm. Sperm comes from the balls, right? Sperm comes from the testicles. But seminal fluid, semen, it comes from the prostate. Now, the prostate is homologous to the Skene's gland. So when a man is at the peak of the feminine submissive, oftentimes he's going to be an individual who likes his prostate played with. So a masculine dominant woman is typically going to be either cuckolding the feminine submissive man, because at the peak of the feminine submissive is typically these 2 primary things: orgasms from penetration, and or cuckold or cuck queen kinks or fetishes. So you're either attracted to your partner being with other people, or you receive orgasms from penetration. These are typically things that exist at the peak of the feminine submissive, right? Or in the feminine submissive when you're really into it, especially on a sexual level. Now, one way that this works and often leads to overstimulation is that most men are not going to be fucking around with the prostate. Most men are primary penis focused, right? When it comes to sex. What is the penis homologous to? The penis is homologous to the clitoris. So the clitoris and the penis are much more external, and most people who masturbate through their penis or their clitoris. So there's much more control that an individual has over the pleasure that they experience. So with it being more superficial, more topical, yes, I know about the clitoral body, the clitoral legs, all that other shit, but it's a little bit more superficial. So it's going to be less connected to your emotions, because your submissiveness doesn't have to be lubricated with your femininity to crave and experience dominance, because through having clitoral and or having penis stimulation, you do not actually have to be lubricated to be stretched. You're not being stretched, right? So typically, a woman who's heavy in her masculine energy is going to be a woman who's only having clitoral orgasms, if anything. Now, I knew a woman who was heavy in her masculine energy but still have nipple orgasms, right? But we have to understand too that oftentimes somebody who's in their masculine energy may have a way of compartmentalizing their submissive ego to avoid repression. So like you could be a masculine dominant man who doesn't focus too much on how good pussy feels so that you don't get out of alignment with your focus. But at the same time, you may say, well, I really like some good head. Good head may be where you compartmentalize your submissive ego. I've done that before myself. Because you can't cut your submissive ego all the way out. You get what I'm saying? But when you compartmentalize it to something that you can teach, then it keeps you in the masculine dominant position while avoiding being overstimulated. So like for me, I'm like, all right, cool. Let me not focus too much on how good pussy feel when I'm out here, especially if I already got a woman I love or some shit like that. Because like I said, you know, when you're dominant, typically you don't have multiple partners most of the time. So just multiple people that you're acting out of your dominant ego with. So when we understand this aspect of things, there's a lot of different ways that it works. But when you lessen your desire for something, then if you make it about something that you can teach, then a person who spends more time with you, it's not going to be just based off of how attractive they are. It's going to be based off of their ability to listen and to learn and to communicate and to put effort into what they're doing. So if it's like head, then a woman who's willing to take time to learn and to pick up the skills and the techniques, she can learn your body on such a level that you can deal with another 30 women outside of the women that the woman that you love and still not get better head. And you don't have to worry about the standard of your submissive ego growing, because let's say you have a primary partner, that's who you're fluid bonded with. If that's your primary partner, that's who you're fluid bonded with, chances are some condom pussy's not gonna feel better than the unprotected sex you're having with your main woman. Maybe that's a different conversation niggas ain't ready to have yet, but that's a real conversation to have. You're protecting your submissive ego and saving that for someone who has met the standard of your dominant ego so that you can be integrated. Many times with masculine dominant women, something that can occur that makes it an issue is that if she is sexually overstimulated, if she's just becoming masculine dominant out of a reflexive way of saying, I want to try something that works better than what I've previously been doing. If she doesn't have the capacity, the self-awareness of her body to be able to teach what she likes, or she doesn't deal with men who meet the baseline of her sexual attraction and where she would be willing to engage with them in casual sex, then the fact that she has engaged in casual sex or sex without a relationship, then the men who could really take her there is where her real desires and her real lust and her real attraction is. This is where her real shadow is integrated. So, this is where her real shadow is. So it really creates a certain level of sexual duplicity if she isn't lucky enough to come across a man who's willing to tap into her sexual shadow. But this is the thing about being masculine dominant, right? If you present yourself as having certain values, certain principles, certain boundaries with how you carry yourself and how you interact with somebody in a dating and relationship sense, then to present this model of how you view yourself, to contradict that with somebody else, can make you appear as an individual who isn't clear with themselves about what their principles are, especially if you aren't honest about it. So a woman who says, I want to wait for marriage, who isn't honest about the fact that she has a lot of sexual history, or the fact that she, gets down like that, is akin to a man who's trying to be masculine dominant with a woman, but is in a position where he's on the down low and has been getting fucked in the ass. Because understand that when it comes to integration, the person who's submissive still wants to be the individual who's at the peak of your submissive ego once you integrate. Very important to fucking understand. Very important to understand. If not, then it appears as if you are an individual who doesn't truly reward good behavior, because you can't teach a person the things that you truly like that give you the most pleasure are things that someone did to you, either with, that were beyond your capacity to teach. So a woman who's masculine and dominant typically has to be a woman who either knows how to teach what she likes sexually, is high value enough to attract a man who is on her actual standards of how sexually attractive she is. She has to develop actual self-discipline, not choosing someone she's not attracted to pretend she has self-discipline to get what she wants out of this situation, but actual self-discipline, right? Or she needs to be integrated where the emotional validation that she receives actually increases her sexual attraction. Like having integrated attraction to where she knows how to influence her own sexual desire based off of what makes the most logical sense to her. Not rewarding with Scooby Snack pussy, but actually genuinely desiring it. Or she needs to be a woman with very limited experience where she hasn't focused on it. You need to primarily stay, if you're going to be masculine dominant, if you're engaging sexually, you need to really mostly operate within your dominant sexual ego. Because if you're not operating primarily within your dominant sexual ego, you have to understand that the submissive ego and the submissive sexual ego is where attachments form. Attachments don't form through the dominant ego. Right? I'm not saying it's not impossible. Like if you're a narcissist, you may get, addicted to narcissistic supply, which is going to be your dominant ego, right? That's what narcissistic supply is. It's just your dominant ego. And if you grow addicted to that and accustomed to that, then, you might have your limerent object, if you like codependent, those different things. But what you have to understand within these scenarios is that if you are overstimulated as a masculine dominant, it will denigrate your dominance. It will denigrate your capacity to be genuinely masculine and to integrate with an individual who doesn't meet that standard. So the higher that standard gets pushed up due to what you experience, the more difficult it is. And you really want your standard of your dominant ego to be based on the level of your competency. And this is where experience helps a masculine dominant. So when you know what your competency level is, then you can set a more realistic, integrated, and fleshed out standard of how dominant you need to be and what someone needs to be receptive to deal with when it comes to you. Because you can interact with someone who doesn't meet your standard of who you would feel safe with your submissive ego, like someone you say is not relationship material, who just has the capacity to be extremely freaky, right? And if, let's say you're a man and you're dealing with a woman who's extremely emotionally damaged, she's been molested her entire life, and she's just trying to take her power back through engaging in a lot of reckless sexual behavior. There may be certain things, like, let's say, let me bring back up the deep throwing example. Like if it's a woman who's in that particular type of position, let's say you want a monogamous relationship and you're dealing with extremely promiscuous women, and these extremely promiscuous women, very sexually liberated, let's say that all of her experience is amalgamated to her having an openness to doing certain things sexually, not based off of how she feels about you, but just based off of her previous experience. So if you're masculine dominant, you still have to be able to plant the flag and stretch the individual that you're dealing with sexually in some capacity. And if not, then that may be somebody who really can play the masculine submissive role with you, to play the anima with you when they just don't feel stretched by what you offer them. So you have to be able to ascertain what would feel stretching to them sexually and non-sexually. And that's how you test if their submissive energy is lubricated with their feminine energy to crave and experience dominance. Right? And this is somewhat where experience plays a role in these things. So if a woman's easy, that could just be a woman who has a low cost due to her sense of self-worth on her sexuality, but still ultimately has a transactional mentality around sexuality. It's one reason why I'm a fan of the biology first approach. She just may have a low cost. That's an easy woman. So you fucking this bitch off of foe for foe. Why don't you just skip the date and offer her some dick? If a woman feels that if she would have fucked you after getting Wendy's, but she wouldn't have fucked with you off the strength, then that's a woman who is easy, right? If you're willing to pay for pussy, like you would pay for sex, you would. If you're that type of guy, but you're only offering to take a woman to a particular place because she doesn't meet your standard, because she's not attractive enough, then you're cheap. right? If you would be willing to do it for another woman just because she's more attractive. Because being more attractive is not what a masculine dominant focuses on. There's a baseline principle, right? There's a baseline of how attractive somebody needs to be. And anything above that is something you need to be able to teach and train to be a masculine dominant. So I think this is a very important concept to understand. It's like, this is the truth about the bare minimum. The truth about the bare minimum. So this is Coach Brody on easy and cheap versus priceless. The truth about the bare minimum.